Hello, welcome back. Again, my name is Cameron Weiner, and I'll be your trainer for this second training session. The second training session is an introduction to Engage. And when we last left off, we were discussing the key design themes that make up Engage and how an Engage model can be used to model a wide range of energy systems. We also covered how Engage can model real-world technologies through its use of technology archetypes and carriers. And today we're going to begin discussing how those technologies can be customized by users to reflect real-world timelines and conditions and systems. So let's go ahead and dive in to how these building blocks work and how you can use them to create your first Engage model. Okay, to start, we need to understand that Engage is a transport model. And as a transport model, Engage simulates how energy or commodities move through a given system. And how the energy or commodities move through this system is defined by the modeler who creates the technology archetypes and the carriers that make up the model. So if we want to understand how this works on a very basic level, let's look at this example. Let's say you want to model a solar photovoltaic system or PV system. And you want to represent how the solar panels can be used to meet the electrical load needed to turn on a light switch, for example, in a hospital. In real life, we understand that the solar panels use energy from the sun to generate electricity, and that electricity usually must move through some series of wires before it can be connected to a hospital's electrical panel. From the electrical panel, the electricity is distributed across its plug loads, including the lights. This is just one example of a contained energy system, and there are many ways we could approach modeling it in Engage. One idea we could take would be to create a supply technology to represent the solar photovoltaic system. Creating a technology Engage is easy, so go ahead and open up your model, and you can follow along as we build our first technology in Engage. And if you've forgotten how to access Engage or you need to create an account, please refer to the first training video. Alrighty. So if you're not already on the activity page of your Haiti_training_model, go ahead and click on the model that you created in the last session, and that should bring you to the activities page that you see in the video. From the activities page, start by going to the Technologies tab, as seen in the video, and click on the New button. In the top right corner, select the Supply Technology, which is the type of archetype technology you want to create. Go ahead and give it a name. In this video, we'll call the technology a solar PV technology. Go ahead and click Save in that top right corner and add it to your technologies catalog. Great. So supply technology, which is what you just created, is one of 5 archetype technologies that Engage offers for users to represent different real-world technologies within their models. A supply archetype technology works by taking some type of resource, as shown in the diagram, and uses that resource to produce a carrier that you define. The supply archetype, but differently, is the technology that introduces a carrier into your Engage model. In the case of our solar PV technology, this supply archetype will introduce electricity into the model using the sun as a resource. Supply archetype technologies are considered appropriate for simple technologies, where the resource is either considered infinite in supply, or it has a time series capacity factor, which we will cover later in more detail. And because a supply technology can rely on any resource, you can see how the supply archetype can represent just about any type of electricity generation asset that you can think of, such as wind turbines, combined cycle gas turbines, coal power plants, nuclear power plants, biomass generators, anything that takes in a resource and outputs a carrier, electricity being the example here. And aside from electricity generating technologies, a supply technology can also represent the supply of a commodity to your energy system. So it could also represent natural gas imports or thermal energy in the form of steam, or even the flow of water from a reservoir that will reach a hydropower plant further downstream. You can also use the supply technology to represent things like that. And so all of these technologies and many more have the potential to be modeled and engaged through the supply archetype technology. And for now, let's assume that the solar system has, this PV system has an infinite supply of sunlight, and it can use the sunlight to produce a carrier, which we will call electricity. As you can see right now, the carrier input to your solar PV technology is highlighted in red. This is because it's our first technology that we've created, and we're going to have to create your first carrier. You can create your first carrier by following the video. So in the video, the user clicks on the black box with the model name at the top of the screen and selects the carriers option from the drop-down menu. Once you are on the carriers page, you can define the carrier name, the rate unit, the quantity unit, and a description as needed. And so every time you create a carrier in Engage, you must define a unit of measure. In our example, we'll define electricity with a rate unit of kilowatts and a quantity unit of kilowatt hours. The rate unit represents the rate of energy, while the quantity unit of kilowatt hours measures the amount of power produced. So after you've defined these units for your electricity carrier, go ahead and click Save and return to the Technologies tab by clicking on the Technologies tab at the top of your screen. Now that your carrier is created, you can assign it to the supply technology by clicking on that red highlighted carrier drop-down menu. And you can select the electricity carrier. the bottom of the screen, you'll see, as you can see in the video, several gray drop-down menus. By clicking through these gray drop-down menus, all of these different parameter options, you can see all of these different parameter options. And each of these options can be configured in different ways to be able to constrain this archetype technology to more closely represent real-world conditions and the real-world technology that you're trying to model. The individual constraints that you'll want to configure will depend on the technology that you're trying to represent, but we'll explore these parameters in more detail once we begin to build our model. And so if you hover your mouse over each of the parameters, you're going to get a description of what the parameter does. And it will also tell you what the parameter's name is in Calliope, that underlying software. So every supply technology will require you to populate a couple things. First being the resource supply and demand parameter, and where you can define your technology's available resource, which in this case is sunlight. And since there's no way to specify infinity in Engage, we'll just use a really big number like 1 gigawatt hour. So go ahead, and if you want to remove a parameter, you can simply click on the X on the right-hand side of the page as shown in the video. Here we specified the resource as 1 gigawatt hour. We click Save. If you want to remove it, click that red X and click Save again. So more on navigating Engage, if you want to bring a parameter to the top of the page, so it's not hidden within those drop-down bars, you can click on the star on the left-hand side of the page for that specific parameter. We're doing that for resource in the video right now. Another way to bring a parameter to the top of the screen is to add an input. And once an input has been populated for that parameter, the parameter will automatically appear at the top of your page. And this leads us to our second input that we have to configure for the supply technology. And that's going to be the capacity. And for this example, it's going to be the capacity of our PV plant. So we would define this parameter, we would scroll down to the technology constraints. And then we would find the production capacity parameter. And let's define it with, let's say for now, 1 megawatt, or what is equivalent to 1,000 kilowatts production capacity. So these two parameters, available resource and capacity, are the most important constraints you need to populate in order to run a supply technology. But there are many more that you'll see we haven't touched. In reality, most of the models you build and Engage will only require you to use some of these parameters. And the wide range of parameters that Calliope offers users mostly just enables you to have broad functionality to constrain your technology to best reflect whatever you're trying to model. So for example, let's look at the monetary constraints. Let's say you're a utility with a power purchase agreement, where you agree to pay the developer a fixed rate for the electricity that the solar plant produces. To account for that cost, you could choose to populate the carrier production cost to be 3 cents for every kilowatt hour the system produces. The carrier production cost parameter, as you can see selected in the video, is ideal for modeling any type of variable cost that is incurred to produce a carrier, such as the variable operation and maintenance costs for a thermal power plant, or in this case, the power purchase agreement cost to the utility. If, however, you paid outright for the PV system, you could account for the system's fixed capital and installation costs. And to be able to represent these costs, you would use the cost of production capacity parameter, as shown in this video. You would use this parameter instead of the production cost parameter that we just configured. Engage comes with configuration features that can, as like a sidebar here, Engage comes with configuration figures that can automatically calculate different unit conversions for you. So if, let's say, you paid $2 million for your solar system, that would mean that the production capacity cost would be $2,000 per kilowatt. When you run the Engage model, Engage will calculate the total cost of the system by multiplying that $2,000 per kilowatt cost by the planned capacity that you have specified of 1 megawatt. And ultimately, Engage will find that the total capital investment cost is $2 million of capital cost input. So when possible, we found that showing the math, as is presented in this video, can be helpful within the text input box. And it's helpful because it can remind yourself and other users what the initial inputs were and how you translated them into costs that Engage can use within your model. So it's a way of documenting how you got your Engage input costs and other parameters. If, however, the formula is too complicated to be entered into the parameter field, you'll always have this description box that's shown in the video at the top of the technologies page. And you can always provide more context and documentation within this box if you're unable to do it within the direct input parameters. So Engage's flexibility in this way allows you to represent a wide range of your contracts and costs within your modeled system, with the option to track additional metrics like interest rates and annual operation and maintenance costs. It's important to keep in mind, though, that the objective in Engage is to define the parameters in the model to represent the costs and cash flows that are going to represent your real world technology in the way that you want it to. So you'll see when we move into the capacity expansion side of the tool that Engage is primarily making decisions based on the cost of various technologies, and it's trying to find a way to operate the system at the lowest cost possible. So it's important to accurately represent costs to determine what type of system Engage builds to meet your demands. It's also important for you to keep in mind as you start to build your model that you should be really consistent in your representations. For example, if you're looking at an existing solar system, you could decide to treat the fixed costs of purchasing and installing the PV panels as a sunk cost and not represent those costs within Engage. This is a perfectly reasonable modeling approach. However, if you decide to model another existing technology, then you should make sure that you're consistent and you treat its fixed costs as sunk costs as well, unless there is an explicit reason not to. So that's an example of how you should model your technologies and your cost representations consistently to make sure that everything is weighted as it should be within the model. And these two reminders will help you avoid mistakes as your models grow to become more complex and as you add more technologies to your system. So with that in mind, let's go back to the solar technology and think about the costs that we've configured. It would be wrong for us to keep both costs listed here, since a power purchase agreement kilowatt hour cost usually bundles the fixed costs of the renewable system with the variable costs. So this would include that LCOE or that PPA cost would include all the costs within that dollar per kilowatt hour price. But we've also configured the cost of production capacity parameter here, which represents the capital costs associated with building that PV plant. Right now, we are double counting these costs. And to avoid double counting these costs, let's go ahead and remove that production capacity parameter. And again, you can do that by clicking on the red X and clicking Save. So now we just have the resource, the production capacity, and the cost of production capacity. Excuse me, the cost of the variable cost of the PPA. So finally, what we want to do is assign a version tag to this technology that labels it as existing. And we're also going to give it a yellow color so that it's easier to see that it's a solar PV plant when it comes time to run a scenario. We've labeled this as existing because it's an already existing technology. It's not a capacity expansion technology. So now that we have our solar system modeled and engaged, we're ready to go ahead and create a transmission technology. A transmission archetype is a technology that can carry a carrier from one location to another within Engage. And these technologies can be helpful when we're modeling systems like electric transmission lines, could be natural gas pipelines, could be rivers, steam pipes, distribution lines, could be freight trains, etc. Moving carriers from one location to another. Creating a transmission technology in Engage is the same process as creating a supply technology. So go ahead and click on that green New button at the top right corner of the screen. In your yellow banner area, name your technology. Here we're calling it PV wire, and go ahead and click Save. Now you should see your new transmission technology option. In the red banner carrier dropdown, go ahead and select electricity as the carrier and click Save. We're using electricity as the carrier for this transmission technology because we want to be able to transport the electricity generated by the PV plant to meet the electricity demand at the hospital. Similar to the supply archetype, the transmission technology can be constrained and engaged to represent a number of real-world technologies. These constraints would be things like the technology's carrying capacity, its carrying efficiency, and the line's direction, as well as any costs associated with building or maintaining the transmission. As you can see in the video, we have starred some of these constraints that are commonly configured. So we're going to make 3 assumptions about our line. First, we're going to assume that the wires connecting the solar system to the hospital have a perfect or lossless carrying efficiency. So they're 100% efficient. To do that, as shown in the video, we will find the carrying efficiency parameter, and we'll go ahead and type 100% in that input box. We'll also assume our technology has a high carrying capacity that can easily accommodate any electrical load produced by the solar panels. So to represent this high capacity, we'll type in 1 gigawatt into the carrying capacity parameter field, as shown right now in the video, and then click Save. We'll also assume that electricity can flow in only one direction, and the one-way parameter assumes electricity by default can flow in 2 ways. So let's go ahead and find the parameter called one-way and set the drop-down option to true, as you can see in the video. And finally, we'll assume that there are no other physical or monetary constraints on the wire. It's already built. So creating a transmission technology that does not have costs, limiting capacities, or efficiencies is called a copper plate transmission system. Copper plate systems disregard the physical restrictions that most transmission systems face. And that assumes that energy can flow from point A to point B without any issues at 100% efficiency. We often model copper plate transmission systems in the early modeling stages because we're usually, but not always, more curious about the generation capabilities of our system than the transmission. But of course, that's not always the case, and it depends on what you're trying to answer with Engage. Transmission lines in real life are also generally very efficient and otherwise complex to model. But we're going to dive into configuring non-copper plate transmission systems in a subsequent training session because it gets a little bit more complex. So now that we have our solar system in PV wire or transmission technology, we can factor in the last technology that we need to make this system complete, which is our demand archetype. Demand archetypes are the opposite of supply archetypes. Supply archetypes create a carrier and introduce it to the system. Demand archetypes, on the other hand, consume and remove carriers from the system. And they do that by configuring a resource with a negative demand value. Unlike supply archetypes, demand technologies will always have a negative resource as it represents a demand or a need that the model has to meet. These negative resources can be as small as the electrical energy it takes to turn on a light bulb, or you can define it to be as large as an apartment, or even as large as a city or a state's total demand to serve an entire electricity market. In our example, we will model the annual electrical load of a hospital through the use of a time series. So what is a time series? A time series is a set of data that tracks a specific variable over time, which for our case is the hourly electrical demand for a hospital. So through Calliope, again, that's the open source software that Engage runs on, the model can work with any type of time series data that the user uploads. And it can work with any time step as long as it's in a CSV file, from 15-minute data to hourly data to monthly time series data. By default, Engage's runtime is set to do 1 hour simulations, and this can be adjusted by the modeler as needed. But largely, we run models with 1 hour simulations, with hour by hour or hourly simulations. We recommend that users upload time series data that matches that interval that you want to represent within your model. So if we want to run an hourly model, then we should probably upload time series that all have hourly time steps. This will really simplify things for you and make sure that you've got the right data in there and Engage is processing it correctly. All right, and one final note on time series is that the model's precision improves significantly as the granularity of the time series is increased. But at the same time, the more time steps you have can also lead to the model taking longer to solve. So you can think about this as 15-minute runtimes have 4 times the amount of data than a 1 hour run. So it's something to think about as you decide what time series interval you want to use. Model's runtime, however, can ultimately be influenced by multiple different variables that go beyond the amount of time steps that you have. And we'll explore what different types of variables can impact your model runtimes in subsequent trainings. If you don't have access to an engaged sample demand profile, you can download a sample profile of a hospital's annual electrical demand by visiting the REOPT webpage. So as you can see in this video, you can Google REOPT NREL, and you can use REOPT to download a time series for your specific location. REOPT is another techno-economic analysis tool that is created by NREL, and it comes with sample profiles that users can download when they visit the website. And you should note that we have displayed the REOPT page in English, but you could use a Google translated or a Chrome translated version of that web page. All right. Okay. So if you specify your location within REOPT and then select your building type, you can click on the electric profile in the bottom left corner, and you'll have a sample load that is ready to go. Alrighty, so when you open your file, you'll need to make 2 changes to get the profile ready to be read into Engage. So get it in the right Engage format. And the first thing you're going to have to do is change this timestamp column. REOP tracks the hospital load by the specific hour. So you can see that column has 1 through 8760. But Engage actually requires that you list your time series data in a date time format. So we're going to have to adjust the timestamp column so that the first load starts on January 1st, 2024 at midnight and continues hourly after that for the year. So you can see in the video, selecting the timestamp, and then creating an equation to fill that out for the rest of the year. The last change you're going to have to make is you're going to convert all the hourly loads into negative values. Because the demand archetype technologies consume carriers, you have to convert everything to be negative. So this video is showing you converting those positive values directly to negative values. And so once you have changed the time series column and you've converted your loads to negative values, or your demands to negative values, you're ready to save that CSV and upload your demand data. An important note is that Engage can only read CSV files. So make sure that when you're saving your file, it's saved with comma separated values. Sometimes we run into problems where people save things with semicolon separated values or as an Excel sheet, and Engage will not be able to read those. All right, so now to upload a time series in Engage, go to the top of the page and click from that black drop-down menu with your model name. And go ahead and navigate to the time series page. You'll see two columns, one for uploading CSVs on the left and one for converting those files into time series data for the model on the right. To upload a CSV file, click on the button that says Add File, and you'll be prompted to browse your desktop. You can document what type of data your file contains in that description box under the CSV Files tab before you click Save. Note that Engage can only process CSV files, as we mentioned earlier, so Excel documents and other templates have to be changed to a CSV format. So once you've uploaded your CSV file, you can then convert it into an Engage time series by clicking on the button that says Create Time Series on the right. Make sure that Engage selects the correct timestamp column and then also the correct value column from your file. For example, in this video, the time step column is the timestamp column, and the electric load parentheses KW column is the value column. In order to create this time series, you're going to have to make sure that that hospital load profile is selected on the left. And then as you can see in the video, they name it and click Save. So once your file is saved, you should be able to visualize that time series file. So by clicking on that hospital load time series, you can explore that time series by zooming in, hovering over the values, and making sure it's varying throughout the year as you might expect it to, or even just varying throughout the day as you might expect it to. So now that we have our time series data uploaded, we can use this data to create our new demand technology. And this process should feel familiar to you because we've done it for both the PV and the PV wire or transmission technology. So as you see in the video, go ahead and go to the Technologies tab to create your demand profile. Scroll down and find that demand archetype technology and select it. And then name your technology Hospital Demand. Once you've selected your demand and named your demand technology Hospital Demand, click Save. And then go ahead and select electricity as the carrier because that's the demand and carrier that you're trying to demand from the system and remove from the system. Alrighty. So if you don't see hospital demand already, that technology already on your screen, you can always refine your hospital demand by clicking on that gray bar that's right below the locations, technologies, nodes, scenarios, and runs tabs. Click on that gray long bar beneath it, and you should be able to locate your hospital demand technology. Once you've located that technology, we're going to add the demand profile that we just uploaded to Engage. And we're gonna select this demand technology for that constraints. Under that constraints resource grade dropdown box, you're gonna find the parameter called resource, supply, or demand, as you can see in the video. And this time, instead of inputting a flat number in the input field, go ahead and click on that blue button that says time series. Doing this tells Engage that you want to use a time series input instead of a value input. Once you've clicked on time series and made it dark blue, go ahead and select that hospital load demand that you uploaded to Engage, as shown in the video. Great. And once you've selected the hospital demand time series input, go ahead and click on the time series button again, and you'll be able to visualize what that time series looks like again, but on the Technologies tab this time. And this is helpful when you don't want to go all the way back to the time series page to remember what your time series looked like. Awesome. So with our 3 technologies configured, remember we configured that PV technology, the PV wire technology, and the demand technology. We can now start building the model that is going to represent our energy system. The model building process can look different to each stakeholder, but usually your first step would be to create a location. As you can see in the video, we're on that locations tab at the top of your screen. On the locations tab, the map box allows you to zoom in on a specific country or area by using the controls on the right-hand side, which can help you navigate to where you would like to drop your new locations. And it can also be helpful just for contextualizing your model because it has street maps and satellite imaging. When you're ready to create a new location, go ahead and go to the upper right-hand corner on that locations page. And that button should say new. And so Engage will automatically drop a little icon that you can drag to the specific location that you're trying to create with Engage. So once you've clicked new, that blue icon should appear and you can drag it around. You can also name it. As you can see, we're creating the hospital location. And then once you've named it and dragged it to the location where you want it to be, you can click Save. Okay, so if you already know, however, the specific coordinates of the location that you want to pick, you can actually specify the latitude and longitude within Engage. And so Engage gives you the option, as we talked about, to name your location, as well as provide, as we didn't mention, a description of location significance. So as you can see in the video, they actually adjusted the Latin long, and they provided a description of that hospital location. And then click Save. You can also specify your location area if that's helpful. Can be helpful for when you're trying to compete different technologies that have land constraints like solar or wind. We don't use this very often, but we do use it occasionally. And the default will be that you have an infinite amount of land. We usually constrain technologies by land at the technologies or the nodes level, and less so from the location level. It's also important to note that every technology you create and engage has to have an assigned location. And this is going to be critical, as you'll see as we move through the model building process, to create a node. And a node is what you need to generate scenarios and ultimately model runs. So as you can see in this video, we've created a hospital location. We're also going to go ahead and create a second location title where we're going to place our solar PV technology. It's also important to know that multiple technologies can be assigned to one location. But we want to create different locations for our solar system and the hospital system because we want to transition our electricity from and represent it moving from our one location at the solar plant to that hospital demand. And as we mentioned, we're going to connect these two locations with our transmission PV wire technology. And since we've already saved our technologies, as we continue moving along those top tabs, we can now skip over the Technologies tab and move to the Nodes tab, which is the third step in our model building process. The Nodes page is very important. So the Nodes page is very important as it's where users can assign technologies they've made to locations that they've created. And nodes are a combination of a location and a technology. And you have to create nodes to be able to create scenarios and then to ultimately run your models. As you see, we've navigated to the Nodes tab at the top of the screen. Alrighty, so assigning a location to a technology is fairly straightforward. And it's similar to the technologies page. You can click through the list of technologies and you can select different technologies from that gray drop-down bar. You can also select locations from this area where you see new location. So here we've selected our hospital demand. We've clicked on this drop-down bar and we've selected the hospital location. And then you can go ahead and click Add Node. Alrighty, so after you've clicked Add Node, you'll notice that, so what we're showing on the screen is you've done it for your demand technology, and now you've also done it for your solar PV technology. You've selected a new location. You have selected your technology, and then you've selected Add Node. And so the technology page that you created over here, the parameters that you defined on the technology tab, you'll see that they automatically get populated on the nodes page once you've created a new node. This feature can be helpful if you are creating multiple technologies, but you want some of the parameters to be specific for each location. For instance, let's say you wanted to create multiple different technologies, multiple different solar technologies. In that case, you wanted to create multiple different solar technologies at different locations. And so in that case, you might want to specify a slightly different solar resource based on that location. And you might want to refine that at the Nodes tab instead of the Technologies tab. So you could just create one technology, but then create multiple different nodes at different locations. And then you could specify different solar resources for those different locations. So go ahead, and we're also going to create a node for our PV wire technology. As you can see in the video, the transmission technology nodes are slightly different. We have to select one where the transmission technology is starting, and then two where it's ending. So in this case, as you can see in the video, the first location we selected is, whoops. The first location we have selected is that solar PV location. And then the second location we've selected where we want the transmission to be able to transmit electricity from the solar PV to the second location. We've selected that to be the hospital, and then we clicked Add Node. Great. So now that we have created our three different nodes, we've created our PV node, we've created our hospital demand node, and now we've created the transmission node that will transmit from the solar PV to the hospital demand. We can go ahead and move on to craft our first scenario, which is the fourth step in this model building process. As you can see in the video, we navigated to that Scenarios tab. And you'll notice that right now the Scenarios tab is blank. In order to create a new scenario, we're going to want to click on that top right New button, as we often do, and we're going to name our new scenario. We're calling it Practice in this video, and then we click Save. And once we've created that new scenario, you'll see that these different nodes that we've created down here are now populated on that scenarios tab for us. And right now, all the nodes that we've created are by default turned off. So what we're going to do now is we're going to enable the nodes that we want to look at for this run. And so if you look at the far right side of the screen, as shown in the video, we're actually going to turn on each of the nodes that we want to look at for our next run. And when we toggle on by clicking that button that was red and turning it to green, that indicates that the node is going to be used in this scenario. And so you can do this for every node that you plan to use it within your run. And if you want to turn everything on, there's that very top toggle on off button in the gray. You can click that and that will turn on or off all the nodes within that scenario. You can also organize your nodes according by filtering at the top. And you can filter by the version tag that you've created, or you can filter by the location, or you can filter by the technology name. And right now, you don't really need to filter because there's only 3 nodes. But as your model gets more complex and you have more nodes to navigate, that will become really helpful for creating and building scenarios. Alrighty. And so the settings tab under the scenario page, you can find by clicking that top left blue button. This is where you go when you're creating overarching constraints on the model that apply to all the nodes. This might include an emissions cap, or a reserve margin, or a renewable portfolio goal or standard. And we're going to cover how to configure these in a later training, but wanted to show you that capability here. So now that we have created a scenario by turning on those 3 nodes, we are in our last step of the model building process, which is running the model. And to run a model based off of the scenarios you designed in your last step, we're going to go ahead and navigate to the Run tab. So as you can see in the video, we have navigated to this Run tab, and then go ahead and click that green New button in the top right corner of your screen. So similar to your Scenarios tab, you can see that there are if you have multiple scenarios, you can click on that gray bar to view them. As shown in the video, we just clicked to create a new run. And so this page is where you can define your run. So now that you are on the run creation page, what you're going to want to do is select a time period for your model run. Engage right now is limited in that it can only do up to 1 year runs. So that means Engage can't do runs that are over 12 months or a year or take place across different years. But Engage can do runs within and up to 1 year. So choosing the correct runtime might be challenging, and it will depend on a lot of different factors. For example, as we mentioned before, the intervals of the run can increase runtime significantly because Engage has to translate more data and solve for a more complex and longer system. By default, as we mentioned earlier, and you can see on that right side, Engage defaults to 1 hour runtimes. And you can adjust this as you want to, as we talked about earlier, 15-minute intervals or 30-minute intervals, or you can increase it even past 1 hour time steps to 2 hour time intervals. But we typically stick with 1 hour. And we're going to do that for this model run. And we're going to go ahead and start by doing a full year run. So we're going to run our model from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. And you'll see where they specified it in these calendar boxes on that page. The other thing you're going to want to do before you run your model, and you'll notice that there's a text box on the right-hand side that you can use to document the details of your run. So we're going to type something in that description box like testing our new nodes with a hospital demand solar PV technology and transmission interconnection. We're also going to go ahead and unselect the clustered run box, as that feature will be going away in future versions of Engage. And so we won't be covering it in these training sessions. And as you can see, they clicked save in the video. So go ahead and click save once you've specified your model run time period from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. You have unchecked the clustered run selection, and you have written a little description about this run. Okay, great. So now that you have built your model and Engage has finished building your model, the run icon will appear at the top of the screen where your model run has been created. As seen in the video, go ahead and click run. That means that your model is now being sent to the solver and is being processed on one of the NREL servers. It might take a second for your run to complete, but once it's completed, the first thing that Engage will display is a dispatch profile of the generators within your run. And you'll be able to see this if you go ahead and click on that plots button on your screen. And you can zoom in and explore this dispatch profile by zooming into different time periods within the run, as you can see the modeler is doing in the video. The left-hand side of the graph will show you the capacities of the different technologies that were used in the run. So remember, we installed a 1 megawatt system, and that's what you should see on the left there. And then if you scroll down further, Engage will also display the costs that were incurred during the run. When you do a full year-long run, those costs are accounted for correctly. If you do less than a year-long run, those costs might not be fully accounted for. You can also use the legend on the right-hand side to filter out specific technologies and look at certain technologies in more detail. So you could look specifically at the solar farm, or you could also look at any unmet demand. For reference, unmet demand is demand that your system was not able to meet with the given generation or storage resources. Great. So after completing your run, you often want to think about the following questions using the information that you can find in this Runs tab. And we're going to go over the answer to each of these questions in our next training session. We're going to explore how we can meet the hospital's remaining demand in our next training session by representing capacity expansion technologies. And we're also going to cover our other two main archetype technologies. So next model, we'll look at how to meet that red unmet demand, and we'll look at building capacity expansion technologies. This concludes our pre-recorded training webinar number 2 and your introduction to Engage. If you have any questions or issues creating your first 3 Engage technologies, please contact us at engage@nrel.gov. Thank you so much.